Welcome to another edition of Cheers to Careers. I'm Steve Ridinghouse, the Career Outreach Coordinator at the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at KU.
We are back for another episode of Cheers to Careers. Today I'm joined by KU alum Jonathan Kealing. Jonathan is the Chief Network Officer for Nonprofit News, and he is joining us from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hey, Steve. Good to see you. I recognize those walls behind you. I'd recognize them anywhere.
Yeah, I don't know if you've been back here since we've had the studio. We opened that up in, it's hard to believe, almost 6 years ago. Yeah, I think January 2020.
I've definitely been in
a few times.
I've definitely been in the renovated Stauffer Flint, and it's good to see that while the bones of the building stay the same, the guts continue to evolve and change with the times.
Yeah, well said. So tell me about your role with Nonprofit News. You're Chief Network Officer. So what does that job?
Yeah. So my role at INN, Institute for Nonprofit News, is pretty broad. You know, it covers everything from upholding our standards, our editorial and independent and transparency standards, evaluating prospective members on whether they meet our standards and fit, and then working with our board of directors on applications and moving them through the process. I also oversee our membership team, so everything that relates to interacting with and supporting member newsrooms. I oversee our editorial collaborations work. We have a whole strand of work with rural newsrooms called the Rural News Network, where we provide services related to editorial collaborations, interns and fellowships. We have a sponsorship network, so I oversee that whole body of work. I also oversee our team that works on audience development, so trying to help nonprofit newsrooms build original owned audiences and work with third-party distribution partners. And then also some burgeoning work in product development. So how can we leverage SMS, for example, to bring news to hard-to-reach rural areas that may not have a reliable broadband connection or something like that. So all of that. And then I also do a number of different special projects. So last year I oversaw all of our organization's work related to the election, which included negotiating a big partnership with the Associated Press to make our members, or give our members access to AP election night results, or to distribute our members' content via election guides to different parts of their community. This year I'm doing a lot of work on disaster response. As you may know, news reporters and photojournalists are often running into the storm when others are running out. And that work is hard and dangerous. And in partnership with the Google News Initiative, we've been able to provide some funding to independent, for-profit and nonprofit newsrooms that are covering disasters as diverse as the LA wildfires at the beginning of this year to the remnants of Typhoon Hailong that just hit Alaska last month. So providing those newsrooms with some essential financial resources to help them keep doing the reporting that we need to know what's going on in those communities.
So obviously, yeah, you're involved with a lot. So are you going on location for this, or are these all kind of virtual meetings, or how much traveling are you doing?
I travel a lot. I travel, 1 to 2 times a month. Some months it's even more, some months it's less. And it varies. So one of the things about working as a leader in a nonprofit news organization is part of the work is also fundraising for all those things that I just talked about. So, some of the meetings are related to fundraising. Some of the meetings are related to supporting newsrooms directly. Some of the newsrooms some of the travel is related to just bringing people together to help them understand, how we can support them and to understand the needs that they may have.
I know there's been a lot of talk about kind of the business model of newsrooms. Is nonprofit news, I know that seems like that's gained some momentum in recent years. I mean, is that working out well in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been at INN for, almost 7 years now. And when I came to INN, there were about 150 to 170 nonprofit newsrooms across the U.S. Today, there's over 500. They stretch from coast to coast, Canada, Mexico, into the Caribbean. And they employ thousands of journalists, and they do some of the most impactful reporting that you've seen. They win Pulitzers, They win awards for, they win broadcast awards. They win all kinds of awards for the work they're doing, and they're growing. Steve, I think you and I both started our careers in newspapers, and I started in 2007, and lately we've been talking a lot about 2005 as the year of peak newspaper employment. And it's been kind of a downhill slide in newspapers my entire career. But what's been really gratifying being in nonprofits for the last 7 years is just seeing that it doesn't have to be a story of retrenchment. It can be a story of growth. And so, in Kansas, we have an organization like the Beacon in Kansas City, various others around the state and across the region, that are adding reporters, adding photojournalists, and telling stories that would otherwise go untold about the communities where they're working.
I'm going to go out on a limb, and when you started your career in 2007, the position you have now did not exist in 2007?
No, the organization I work out didn't exist. INN was started in 2009, and it was started to serve this really nascent idea that journalism doesn't have to be done by big profit-seeking enterprises like TV stations, newspapers. Not that those organizations do bad work; they do great work, and we need more of them, and we need more journalists in those newsrooms too. The idea to create nonprofit news organizations was to ensure that not everything was tied up in organizations that were trying to drive shareholder returns. Nonprofits are community benefit organizations. They exist to drive community profits, not shareholder profits. And that can be a really great place to do journalism.
What kind of pulled you towards that nonprofit direction? I mean, did somebody recruit you, or you saw this opening and said, wow?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I started at the Journal World in Lawrence, and I had a great time, learned a ton, both about journalism and the business of journalism. And eventually I decided it was time to move on, and I got recruited into public media. So I moved to Minnesota from Lawrence, where I worked after graduation, to work for a company called Public Radio International on their digital side, helping them launch a new digital news brand. It quickly became clear to me that there was a lot of potential in this space, a lot of potential in in a news organization that's supported by voluntary philanthropic contributions to not just exist, but to thrive. And so over time in various roles at PRI, I learned about fundraising. I became a better leader. And so when it became time to, move on from that organization, I knew that I wanted to really deepen my expertise in the nonprofit space, because I felt like that was an area where growth was happening and where I could make a real difference. And so it was, I got recruited into public radio, and then I kind of moved myself into the more direct primarily digital nonprofit news space.
And I know when you come back, I know you're still involved with the J School quite a bit. I know you're with the William Allen White Foundation. So what do you gain from being part of that experience? I know we have a talented group of volunteers that really keep that moving and supporting our school.
I love working with students. I've been privileged to be able to mentor a couple of different Kansan editors over the last couple of years. I'm working with one of their sports editors this year. I worked with their director of photography last year. And so the William Allen White Foundation is part of that for me. It's a chance both to stay connected to KU and provide my perspective as a professional in the space to the professors and deans and whatnot who are training that next generation, and kind of telling them what I'm seeing from where I'm sitting in terms of opportunities and skills and gaps and those sorts of things. So I view it as an investment in the future and a chance to help people like people help me. I think about the professors I had, Malcolm Gibson, Peggy Kruer, Rick Musser, Suzanne Shaw, and the connections they helped me make to the profession. There are people who, I mean, I remember as editor of the Kansan when a professional would come to campus to do on-campus interviews or to speak in classes. Suzanne would hand me the J School credit card and say, take them to dinner at Teller's. I always had a great time, but it's no lie that, probably half a dozen different people who I took to dinner on as a, 21 or 22-year-old Kansan editor, thanks to Suzanne, I've connected with in my professional life. One of the directors of from INN's board of directors was someone who I had dinner with at Teller's on Mass Street after he did interviews for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. I got to know Sherry Chisenhall at the Wichita Eagle and bumped into her. Peter Badia, I knew him. So I view it as a chance to make those connections that may pay off for me, but it may also pay off for those students in whole other ways. And so that's what drives me to want to stay involved and stay connected to the J School and to provide, whatever expertise I can.
Jonathan, what kind of memories do you have of the UDK experience? I know you're always feel like you're doing something new. I think reporters, sports editor.
Yeah.
I think you were managing editor too for a while.
Yeah. I got involved with the Kansan kind of as soon as I got on campus. I did some correspondent and special section work, and then covered women's basketball. That was really, as anyone who's gone to KU will tell you, Allen Fieldhouse is a special place. And being able to be a reporter inside of Allen Fieldhouse, covering the women's basketball team was super special and meaningful. But my strongest memories come from the year I spent as editor. Because there were some real challenges. I remember leading coverage of a fire that killed 3 people outside of Lawrence, and then the follow-up coverage that examined in depth why there weren't any sprinkler systems to put out that fire. And I remember the work of directing the art for that story, as well as editing the story, as well as kind of pulling it all together. So those memories hold strong, but I guess the memories that are most clear are the ones that relate to sort of having to lead and manage through crisis. When I was editor of the Kansan in the spring, campus was hit by a microburst. It shuttered campus for 2 or 3 days, roofs blown off buildings, no power, no internet. But this happened on a Sunday. And I distinctly remember, I was, asleep in my apartment just off campus and just kind of hearing the storm and being awoken by it. And sort of, okay, it went away. And I remember I went back, I was like, okay, I can go back to sleep. And then about 10 seconds later, I was like, I don't think sleep is the right move at this point. I think there's work to be done. And so, we gathered a news team in the newsroom at Stauffer Flint before KU could even close campus down. And so we had this little nucleus of journalists inside what was otherwise a totally blocked off campus that were taking photos, doing, reporting. I was doing interviews for AP radio and, from the newsroom in Stauffer Flint, we were the center of coverage of that story. And then we were, I'm not old enough to have to deal with things like physical newspaper plates or anything like that. But I still remember, because the internet was out on campus, we couldn't use any sort of networks. So we had to have CDs or those old 100 megabyte discs and carry stories from computer to computer, and then carry pages from computer to computer, and then carry all that down to where we printed at the Journal World at the time to get the newspaper out. All the while continuously updating a website with information from campus. Campus is going to be closed. So doing real-time reporting while also creating a product to kind of inform and memorialize the event the next day. So I was really proud of what we did. No one told us we had to do that. There was no, eventually, I think I talked to our advisor, Malcolm Gibson, on the phone eventually, but he couldn't get to campus. It was those of us who I managed to rouse to probably what felt like a very early hour then, but now in retrospect was probably like 9 or 10 in the morning, and get to campus to get to work. And I'm really proud of how that all turned out. And if memory serves, that was also the same day that KU started, the men's basketball team started what would be its record long conference champion streak. So we were pairing this like incredible news story. Fortunately, if my memory serves, no one died, but a lot of destruction with this, real accomplishment by the men's basketball team. At the time, we didn't even know how significant that, first championship would be, but that was the first one in what became that record-breaking streak, and I felt like we covered both elements of that story really well.
Yeah, that's taken up to like 13 or 14 years, so yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Well, so were you destined to be Jayhawk? Because aren't you from a family?
I am from a family of Jayhawks. Both my parents went to KU, met at KU. My uncle Bob Kealing is a J School grad, KU J School grad. He worked in TV at Cake in Wichita and then at WESH in Orlando. He actually, my first exposure to the journalism school was actually with him. He brought me when he guest lectured in one of Max Utzler's multimedia reporting classes. And so I was, I don't know, probably 14 or 15, sitting in a college class and meeting Max and some of the other J School professors and just kind of getting to experience what the school was like and getting to know campus. My grandparents lived in Lawrence while I was in school, so a lot of connections. But I would say it was it wasn't determined. I applied to other schools. I went to high school in St. Louis. I could have easily gone to a good journalism school at the University of Missouri. I can have all sorts of other feelings about their athletics program, but they've got a pretty decent journalism program there. I applied to another school that probably shouldn't be named, North Carolina. So it was not set. But ultimately, one of the things that set KU apart for me was that I would have an opportunity to lead and lead student journalists in doing real journalism if I wanted it. And I'd have to say that was a terrific decision. Because that experience has, proven foundational for so many things that I do in my job today. That sort of leadership and management and, beyond just the journalism skills, but applying those other skills in a journalism context was just really, really excellent.
Well said. Before we move on to Fast Five, one last question. What advice do you have, like, say, for the class of 2026 that they want to do what you're doing, or reporting, editing? What should they know?
I would say for anyone graduating today in this environment, you're going to want to be prepared for change. I mean, AI is coming for all of us, and I think being fluent and conversant in responsible, ethical ways to use AI is important. But even more than that is just being flexible. You should be a terrific writer. You should be a good editor. You should know how to wield a camera. You should know how to edit. All those things need to be part of your repertoire, but you need to be flexible and ready to learn new things, because you will know a lot coming out of school, but in 5 or 10 years, there'll be a whole lot more that you'll need to learn. And so I would definitely emphasize flexibility and a lifelong curiosity as being essential skills to being a successful journalist today. So that's sort of at a macro level. on a specific level, I mean, there is so much great work and great work environments in nonprofit news organizations all over this country. You know, from Vermont to California, from Alaska to Florida, Hawaii, and everywhere in between. There are some really great nonprofit news organizations that are always looking for talent, and they'd be a great place for folks to start their careers.
Awesome. Well said, Jonathan. Okay, so hey, time for Fast Five. I know you do a lot of traveling. Where's your favorite place to travel, or places you have been to? Either for work or for fun.
Yeah. Favorite place I've been for fun. I went to Croatia a dozen years ago or so. Great food, wonderful people, awesome wine. And really stunningly beautiful, both in terms of history and architecture. In the U.S., I've been to Santa Barbara a couple times, and that's a really sort of fun place. But I guess it's hard to talk my way into an answer in the U.S. Montana is probably one of the best places I've been to in the U.S. You know, whether it's national parks or skiing or floating down a river or fishing or you name it. Especially for someone who spends a lot of their time in cities, the chance to get out into nature in Montana is something that really can't be beat.
So when you travel, are you claiming the aisle seat or the window seat?
I am an aisle seat guy through and through. In fact, when my wife and I travel together, most often we take aisle seats directly across from each other so that we both can have the aisle seats.
Nice. I know you have two children, a fifth grade son, who I think plays chess pretty well. So who's the better chess player? You're a good son.
He's definitely a better chess player than I am.
Okay. And I think you're involved with the Cub Scouts. So what's your best Cub Scout survival outdoors? What are you known for?
Yeah, you know, I just took a group of 7, 10, and 11-year-olds camping last weekend, or 2 weekends ago. Last weekend was Halloween, so 2 weekends ago. And if there's, you know, any sort of advice I would give, it's number one, have a beanie you can put on your head when you're going to sleep, because you lose the bulk of your heat out the top of your head, especially for someone who's got a follicle situation like I do. But it applies to 10 and 11-year-olds as well. And then the other tip that I hand out is pick what you're gonna, if you're gonna change clothes in the morning, throw that in your sleeping bag the night before, because you're gonna be way happier putting on warm clothes than you are freezing cold clothes.
Great tip. And the last one, you kind of touched on this earlier as an editor, like the stories you covered. Do you have a most memorable KU story that you wrote?
You know, it's funny. I had no idea it would be it at the time, but I covered the story of Marion Washington's retirement as a coach at the University of Kansas. And, you know, she was a pioneer in women's sports, women's college sports, bar none. You know, she was the first women's athletics director at KU. She started the women's basketball, or she started the track team, and I think wasn't the first basketball coach, but she was certainly the first meaningful basketball coach at KU. Yeah. And so that then continued to echo through my life in interesting ways. You know, my wife's dad was also a J School grad, and his first job out of J School at KU was as the first sports information director for women's sports at KU. And so he worked with Marion then. And so I've had a chance to talk with Marion Washington since. And so that story, while I had no idea at the time the impact it would have, it's resonated and sort of echoed through my life over the last 20 years.
Yeah, great memories covering KU basketball when I was a Capital Journal correspondent in the late 80s. So for 2 seasons, I covered all the KU women's basketball home games. So great memories. Hey, Jonathan, thanks for spending some time with us, and cheers to your careers. I mean, it's hard to believe it's almost, 20 years since you graduated from KU. So keep up the great work. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.